Alright, guys, time to get into more articles of more modern day scenarios. And, I don't do much research. I should go to ground news and figure this out. But, warning, there could be some, like, right wing article trying to concern troll in their favor to act like they care, but it's really just an anti propaganda message to them. But, yeah. Um, Anyways, Japan forces sterilization on trans people. Or they used to. My guess is they still do, like, in the population issue they're facing. I imagine they don't give a shit what they're gonna do to people. I could be wrong here. This is, again, this is, a relatively old, uh, theme that I had put together a long time ago, before I started getting into the swing of things. Alright. Japan forces trans people to be sterilized to change their gender. This man is suing. A trans man in Japan has filed a request to have his gender legally recognized without being forcibly sterilized as currently required by Japanese law. Gen Sakuzi, 46, filed his request on Monday in the Shizuoka Family Court. According to Japanese daily newspaper, the Manachi Family Court oversees changes to family registers, which records births, family relations, and gender. While Suzuki has undergone hormone replacement therapy and top surgery, he doesn't wish to get bottom surgery, citing a, quote, heavy impact on physical and mental health, end quote. Yeah, you shouldn't have to get bottom surgery necessarily. It's way more risky. Yeah, true. I mean, if you have the money to do it and you wanna, obviously go for it. Anyways. Oh, and the social support, right? Alright. Quote, "It is wrong for the state to force an unwanted surgery," Suzuki told Domenici. Quote, "There should be various options." The newspaper also reported that he and his female partner hoped to marry, but in order to do that, Suzuki would be compelled to legally change his gender, as trans people cannot get married without doing so in Japan. If his request is rejected, he has indicated interest in appealing to Japan's Supreme Court. In 2019, Japan's Supreme Court rejected a similar appeal for Takahito Usai, a trans man who claimed that the sterilization requirement was unconstitutional. The court disagreed, claiming that the requirement was constitutional as it is, quote, meant to reduce confusion in families and society, end quote. This is a way of reducing trans people, yes, by wanting them to get sterilized. They can exist like that as long as they're not doing anything to the population. Okay. While the ruling was unanimous, two judges acknowledged that social mores were changing. The proposed regular review of the law was with respect to personality and individuality, end quote. That same year, however, a woman was denied her request to legally change. What? That same year, however, a woman was denied a request to legally change her gender because she had an 8-year-old child, even though she complied with the government's surgical requirements and had relinquished custody of her child. Other trans parents have been forced to do the same, with Fumino Sugiyama, the co-chair of Tokyo Rainbow Pride, writing that, quote, "The most painful thing," end quote, "for him to grapple with was not being a legal guardian of his child. Quote, my girlfriend gave birth to the child last year, and we are raising the kid in our house," end quote. Sugiyama wrote in 2009 op-ed for Reuters, and goes on to say, "But it doesn't matter how many times I change diapers or feed my baby, I have no legal rights. Legally, I'm just, quote, a roommate, helping out." That's kind of what demographers would call cohabitation. Damn, that's messed up. Seeing that, reading that, connecting it with this article, that's true. They will deny your existence no matter like no matter what. Anyways, uh Japan's Gender Identity Disorders Special Cases Act, which was passed in 2004, has 5 requirements for trans people seeking to legally change their genders. Applicants must be 20 or older, remove their reproductive organs, and have a body that is, quote, endowed with genitalia that closely resemble the physical form of an alternative gender, end quote. Additionally, people cannot apply to legally change their gender if they are currently married or if they have a minor child. The pressure has been steadily mounting against the outdated law for years. In May, watchdog organization Human Rights Watch released a report that examined the impact of the law on the country's trans population, with community members claiming that the legislation undermined their dignity. The organization also claims that the law is, quote, contrary to international human rights law and international medical best practices, violating fundamental human rights, end quote. The name of the law itself is outdated, quote, as gender identity disorder, end quote, is no longer used as a diagnosis in many major medical organizations. In 2013, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders dropped, quote, gender identity disorder, end quote, from its list of diagnoses. Denmark was the first country to declassify trans identity as a mental illness on a federal scale, with the World Health Organization following suit in 2019. Nevertheless, many countries still classify trans people as mentally ill and force them to undergo sterilization in order to be legally recognized, including several states in the U.S. Although not a federal requirement, 8 states, including Texas, Kentucky, Iowa, and Georgia, demand proof or surgery, a court order, or an amended birth certificate to change the gender marker on an identity document, according to the Movement Advancement Project. With tracking discriminatory legislation across the country, the European Court of Human Rights only ruled that mandatory sterilization was a violation of human rights in 2017, but 13 countries in the region still have such requirements in place. Alright. Okay. Alright, this next story obviously that Japan one segues into this, where this is talking about the U.S. supposedly requiring people to have bottom surgery in order to attain certain rights. This is the Daily Beast, so I feel like this one might be a right-wing article, but this is about eugenics upon trans people, not. Oh, hold on. Yeah, this is uh, eugenics on the trans community, not the trans community being at fault for this happening. I can see this again. This is what a right-wing article would fearmonger with, by trying to sound like they care. Again, I don't know if the Daily Beast. I might be wrong. I'm just preparing for somebody in the comment section to point out that I read a specific context from a specific article and didn't realize it. But spoilers. Okay, it's not just Japan. Many U.S. states require transgender people to get sterilized. Many transgender people in the United States must undergo sterilizing medical procedures if they want birth certificates and driver's licenses that require their gender. Oh, I believe this is a Paxton thing, though I don't think that went through. Alright. Or no, I don't think he was. Anyways, more outrageous than The Economist asking in a tweet, quote, should transgender people be sterilized before they are recognized, end quote. More outrageous still than Japan continuing to require transgender people be sterilized to have their gender identity legally recognized is the fact that sterilization requirements for transgender people are not restricted to one country. This week may have been the first you heard about transgender sterilization. After the Japan Supreme Court ruled earlier this year in defense of the country's 2003 law requiring transgender people to have their gonads removed or gender non-functional before being allowed to legally change their gender, the advocacy group Human Rights Watch released a groundbreaking report on the impacts of the outdated law. Quote, "Do you get the surgery or have children? This is a decision that none of us should be forced to take," end quote, one transgender woman told Human Rights Watch in the reports. Quote, "It is a despair," end quote. Is this? Okay. On social media, though, the report itself was overshadowed by the Economist's since deleted tweet, which seemed to pose compulsory transgender sterilization as an open question for debate, and for which the magazine's parent company later apologized. We deleted an earlier tweet which mischaracterized our article on transgender rights in Japan. Here is that article, which remains. Okay. A spokesperson for The Economist parent company told out that the question, quote, was a line from the article that was mistakenly taken out of context, end quote. But the effects of even introducing that question for public discussion did not go unnoticed by transgender people. As Broadly's Diana Target noted on Twitter, the tweet seemed on its face to be yet another. Oh, what? Another example of media outlet presenting transgender humanity as the object of two-sided debate rather than a self-evident truth. Quote by Diana Target. Quote, "Should trans people be sterilized?" End quote. "This is our world. We make it each day through our actions and our speech. Trans people are regarded as animal, and we are meant to accept this as a critical discourse, lest be accused of silencing free speech." But the transgender sterilization issue is much broader than any one country or tweet. In fact, many transgender people in the United States must undergo sterilizing medical procedures if they want birth certificates and driver's licenses that reflect their gender. I don't know if this is true, but just based on, it doesn't surprise me from the context I'm thinking of anyways. When I underwent sex reassignment surgery, for example, I had to sign California's Consent to Sterilization Form, PDF. I needed the surgery to alleviate my gender dysphoria, as I gladly signed the form despite how anonymous it looked. But the operation has also practical impacts too. I would finally be able to update the gender marker on my Georgia driver's license. Georgia, according to the Movement Advancement Project, is one of the 10 states that still require transgender people to obtain proof of surgery, a court order, or an amendment birth certificate in order to update their driver's licenses. So I feel like this has to not be completely true now, right? There's so much like transparency about the trans movement. There has to be like more victories that I'm not seeing and talking about. Okay. Birth certificate laws in the United States are even stricter, but map data, 17 states require sex reassignment surgery to update birth certificate gender markers, and 3 bar any updates. 3 state-level policies effectively posit that the only way to be a valid transgender person is to fully medically transition, often a great expense. Yeah. Their cumulative effect is chilling. Transgender Americans are... What? Transgender Americans are often subjected to a cruel calculus left to determine which medical treatments they need and which would further their legal recognition. Although transgender Americans are currently able to update their gender on passports and with Social Security administration without undergoing surgery. The state-level patchwork for requirements for driver's license and birth certificates puts thousands in a position of having to live without correct documents unless they want and can afford surgery. Only 11% of respondents in 2015 U.S. Transgender Survey said that they had their authentic name and gender on all their identity documents. That's not as overt as Japan's sterilization requirements, to be sure, but it's a difference in scale more than it is a different in kind. This is why, in the aftermath of the tweet from The Economist about the Japanese requirement, prominent transgender voices like Rewire news journalist Caitlin Burns advised Americans to look in their own backyards for laws and policies that de facto require sterilization. Alright. This is very specific wording that I think is safe, but require sterilization is a realization of the eugenics movement, but I feel like a conservative reading this who wasn't pro-trans would just see that as require sterilization as that's what the trans movement wants, which is crap. Okay. Do the people who are horrified by this headline not realize that most U.S. states still require bottom surgery to change their legal sex? Bottom surgery is sterilization, and it's a barbaric requirement. Indeed, the United States falls well behind the recommendations of human rights experts, as Human Rights Watch noted in its report on the situation in Japan. Organizations including the World Health Organization and the United States Program on HIV/AIDS issued a joint statement in 2014 that called for an end to, quote, forced, coercive, and otherwise involuntary sterilization, end quote. The Yogi Karta principles, developed by a group of human rights experts to guide the international community on LGBTQ rights, also state that, quote, no one shall be forced to undergo medical procedures, including sex reassignment surgery, sterilization, or hormone therapy, as a requirement for legal recognition for their gender identity, end quote. Well, I hope that doesn't go as far as to banning all of this stuff for people who want it. Like, this wording, like, as an reasonable emotional response, could get people to just ban it outright. And we're seeing, like, crazy shit happening now. And this article is pretty old, so relatively old, not like 2005. Alright. Despite the positions of human rights groups, many European countries, like France, recently had sterilization requirements in place for transgender people that were finally condemned by the European Court of Human Rights in 2017. Even still, the court ruling did not put an end to sterilization requirements across Europe. As of 2018, according to most recent Trans Rights Europe map developed by umbrella organization Transgender Europe, some 14 European countries still require sterilization for legal recognition, including Finland and the Czech Republic. That's down from 24 European countries in 2013, but it's still far from zero. The answer to the question, quote, should transgender people be sterilized before they are recognized, is, of course, no. The real outrage here is that the question continues to be asked, not just in places like Japan, but across Europe and in our own backyard. Alright, so sorry to anyone that was skeptical of that, but this is happening, guys. This is historically just very crucial to understand and fight against. Okay. I forget what this article is about. Oh. So, I don't know how accurate this is because we go back and forth with bodily autonomy. So, this happened one time, which basically outlines what they used to do, obviously. Okay. European Court puts an end to forced sterilization for trans people. On Thursday, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that requiring sterilization of individuals seeking to change in their legal. What the heck? Sorry. Uh, uh, Ruled that requiring sterilization or individuals seeking to change their legal gender recognition violates human rights. Okay. 22 countries in Europe currently still require sterilization to access gender identity recognition, but Thursday's ruling, again, Thursday rulings, maybe this is obvious to people, like, it's just weird for me seeing Thursday. Must be a civics day. Okay. Ruling will require all to change their laws and policies regarding the forced sterilization of trans people seeking to have their gender identity legally recognized. Despite the positive element to the ruling, the court stopped short of ruling that medical examination and mental health diagnoses are in breach of the European Convention of Human Rights. Jessica Stern, executive director of Outright Action International, commented on the decision, saying, quote, "Today, the world moved in the right direction for trans rights everywhere. Forcing unnecessary medical interventions to access basic human rights, like legal recognition of a partner's gender, is barbaric. As more countries review laws for gender identity recognition, it is essential that they forego outdated policies and follow legislation that places like Malta or Argentina, which prioritizes self-determination. The decision from the European Court raises the bar globally." End quote. Julia Ert, executive director of Transgender Europe, a human rights organization that has been at the forefront of fighting these laws, also commented on the ruling. She said, quote, "Today is a victory for trans people and human rights in Europe. This decision ends the dark chapter of state-induced sterilization in Europe. The 22 states in which a sterilization is still mandatory will have to swiftly end this practice. We are looking forward to supporting those in other countries in reforming their national legislation." End quote. This ruling results from 3 cases against France submitted in 2012 and 2013, which leveraged Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, the, quote, "right to respect for private and family rights," end quote. Article 3 of the Convention, the, quote, "prohibition of torture," sorry, end quote, as well as Article 14, prohibition of discrimination. In 2015, the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF International, considered an anti-LGBT hate group by Southern Poverty Law Center, submitted a written intervention to the court on this case, positing that states should have the right to address issues as they pertain to transgender individuals based on national context, and that the court should not consider the Yogyakarta principles and set of international principles relating to sexual orientation and the gender identity, which, when considering the 3 cases. Stern commented on the intervention of ADF International and added, "Alliance Defending Freedom makes a mockery of the world freedom when they put religious dogma over the rights of individuals to be legally recognized. These cases are about every trans person's right to self-determination and the freedom of every trans person to not be forcibly sterilized. This is, without a doubt, a fundamental right that must be upheld in every context." End quote. Since October 2016, France no longer forced sterilization on trans citizens to access gender identity recognition. Oh, nice. Sweden abandoned the requirement of sterilization in 2013. The Swedish government has recently announced that anyone who was forced to undergo sterilization to access legal gender recognition between 1972 to 2013 is eligible for compensation from the state in the amount of 250,000 or 25,000. Maria Jardin, Deputy Executive Director of Outright and former Executive Director of Sweden's largest LGBTQ organization, RFSL, comments, quote, "Money can never fully compensate the suffering of those that were forced to undergo sterilization, but it but it is an admittance from the state that the requirement was a violation of people's rights. End quote. Only four countries in Europe, Norway, Ireland, Malta, and Denmark, currently have gender identity recognition policies that are based on that principle of self-determination without any medical requirements. Earlier this year, LGBT activists in Ukraine were pleased to see revisions to the rules which allow trans people to legally change their gender. The gender recognition process for trans people get a lot could get a lot simpler in Ukraine under proposed new rules. Rights groups and Human Rights Watch made a complaint to the special reporter on torture on abuses of an old system. The new rules, which will build on or change Order 60 of the Ministry of Health in Ukraine, still fall short of other countries, notes the Human Rights Watch, but are welcome to step forward for transgender people there. Previously, trans people were made to undergo psychiatric observations and sterilization in order to get divorced and get access to gender reassignment surgery. The steps were all necessary in order for trans people to legally change their gender on official documents. Those who did not want to undergo the process were subjected to all life of uncertainty with ID, which does not match up with their gender identity. The new rules would do away with the sterilization elements to the process, and the psychiatric evaluations would no longer be fully necessary. Alright, they would also not be made to appeal before the State Evaluation Commission, but they would still be made to divorce and undergo outpatient psychiatric evaluations. Human rights groups like Human Rights Watch still urge countries like Ukraine to do away with the archaic system and put into place something which recognizes the needs of trans people. Alright, so that's good. I haven't looked for any updates on that since putting this together a few months ago, but things are going back and forth, it sounds like. Okay. I think this will be possibly the last one for this video. UK government blocks Scotland's new gender recognition law. Alright. I don't know the context of yet, so we'll get to it as soon as this loads. UK government blocks Scotland's new gender recognition law. Alright. CNN. The UK government has blocked a new law intending to allow trans people in Scotland to change their legal gender without a medical diagnosis. A controversial move that has added fuel to the already emotional debate over Scottish independence. Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, called the intervention a, quote, a full frontal attack on our democratic election Scottish Parliament and its ability to make our own decisions on devolved matters, end quote, in a post on Twitter on Monday. Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack, the minister representing Scotland in the UK government, announced Monday that Westminster had taken the highly unusual step of blocking the Scottish bill from becoming law because it was concerned about its impact on UK-wide equality laws, a justification that trans groups dismissed. Here's what you need to know. What's in the Scottish law? The law is designed to make it easy for people in Scotland to change their legal gender. Under the current system, trans people must jump through a number of hoops to change their gender marker in their documents. They must have a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, a condition defined by the distress caused by the discrepancy between a person's body and the gender identity, and prove that they've been living in their chosen gender for 2 years. They also need to be at least 18 years old. The new rules would drop the medical diagnosis requirements, moving instead of self-determination. The waiting time would be cut from 2 years to 6 months, and the age limit lowered to 16. Why did Scotland want to change the rules? Campaigners have long argued that the current process is overly barbaric, expensive, and intrusive. The Scotland government held two large public consultations on the issue and then proposed the new, simpler rules. Quote, we think that the trans people should not have to go through a process that can be demeaning, intrusive, distressing, and stressful in order to be legally recognized in their lived gender. Hold on. The government said when proposing the new rules. In the end, a substantial majority of Scotland lawmakers from across the political spectrum. Oh, what? Get out of here. You did that on purpose. Okay. Hold on, guys. Man, this almost makes me want to read another article from this because this is just so absurd. It like wanted me to press the subscribe button or something. Alright. The government. Okay. In the end, a substantial majority of Scottish lawmakers from across the political spectrum voted for the change last month. The final tally was 86 for 39 against. What was the reaction in Scotland? The bill sparked emotional reaction on both sides. The debate over the proposal was one of the longest, most heated in the history of Scottish Parliament, and the final vote had to be postponed after the session was interrupted by protesters shouting, quote, shame on you at the lawmakers. Many human rights, well, I don't even know, like in terms of, like I think it's just normal for people to self-discover themselves in a gendered way. So I mean, 16 might be young, but we don't really know if someone's just going through a figuring it out phase or they actually are trans. So it would be really disrespectful to just full stop make it not a thing. But we can't keep going lower and lower, obviously. But um, it's not the same as pretending you're fucking. So I was hearing people be smartasses and assholes and compare like gender identity to like pretending they were Luke Skywalker or something. Like, good lord, it's just the most ridiculous shit ever. But yeah. Anyways, many human rights and equality organizations and campaigners welcomed the new rules, pointing to the growing number of democratic countries where self-determination is the norm. The Equality Network, a leading Scottish LGBTQI rights group, said that after years of increasingly public prejudice against trans people, things have started to move forward, end quote. But the bill also attracted huge amounts of criticism, including from some lawmakers in the governing Scottish National Party and Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling, who said the law could have a detrimental impact on the effects of women and girls. Yeah. Oh no, 6,000th place. Can you believe it? Oh no, yeah, totally taking away that chick's 6,000th place. Okay. Rowling and other opponents of the bill argued it would weaken the protection of spaces that are designed to make women feel safe, such as women-only shelters. The Scottish government rejected that argument, saying the law didn't change the rules on who can and cannot access single-sex spaces. It also said that experiences from countries that have made similar changes showed no adverse impact on other groups. Campaigners agreed, quote, there are no downsides, end quote. The LGBTQ campaign group Stonewall said, quote, for example, when Ireland did it, nobody else was affected except trans people who, for the first time, were able to have their gender recognized in a straightforward and empowering way by the state. Why is the UK government getting involved? Scotland has a uh, devolved government established in 1999, which means that many, but not all, decisions are made at the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood, Edinburgh. The Scots can pass their own laws on issues like healthcare, education, and environment, while the UK Parliament in Westminster remains in charge of issues including defence, national security, migration, and foreign policy. The UN government can stop Scottish bills from becoming law, but only in a few very specific cases. For example, if it believes the Scottish bill would be incompatible with any international agreements or with the interest of defense and national security, or if it believes that the bill would clash with UK-wide law on an issue that falls outside of Scotland powers. Under the rules that set out of Scotland how Scotland is governed, uh, London has 4 weeks to review a bill after it's passed by Holyrood, after which it is sent to King for royal assent, the last formal step that needs to happen before it becomes the law. The deadline for intervention on the new gender bill was set to expire later this week, but many in Scotland have accused the UK government of playing politics and blocking the new bill for political rather than constitutional reasons. Quote, whatever your view on the bill, people vote on Scottish Parliament elections thinking their election and MSPs who will represent and legislate for them on devolved matters, end quote, said Emma Roddick, a Scottish Parliament lawmaker for the SNP. Sunak has demonstrated when SNP has said for decades that's only true as long as Westminster wants it. Two-thirds majority in favor of a bill within devolved competence. Tories we didn't elect want to strike it down for political reasons. Tories? Okay. What is the UK government's argument? In his statement Monday, Jack argued that the bill would impact UK-wide equality legislation. The power over gender recognition laws is devolved to Scottish government, but legislation governing equality is set by Westminster. Quote, the bill would have a significant impact on amongst other things, JB-wide equalities matters in Scotland, England, and Wales. I have concluded, therefore, that blocking it is the necessary and correct course of action, end quote. Speaking in the UK Parliament on Tuesday, Jack said he, quote, had not taken the decision lightly, end quote. But advocates disagree. Rights group Transactual told CNN in a statement that it saw, quote, no justification, end quote, for the UK government decision to block the bill over concern for UK-wide equality laws. There really isn't any takeaway. You're not going to have any of your rights taken away, seriously. You're not going to have rights taken away just because you are inclusive of trans people. That's what I meant. Like, we've seen it in America with sports, so it's pretty ridiculous. Obviously, some trans people win. It's just, these are athletes, guys. These aren't normal people. No average male is going to beat, like, an athlete. But nobody's saying that. It's mostly people, I assume, athletes who are, also transitioning. So the concern is still silly. Okay. Trans people have never needed gender recognition to be protected by the Equality Act, she added. What's next? The Scottish government cannot overrule the decision if it wants to take the legislation forward. It has two options: amend the bill and bring it back to the Scottish Parliament, or challenge the UK government in court. Jack said Monday that he hoped to find, quote, a constructive way forward if the Scottish government decided to make changes to the law and present it again. However, that seems unlikely. Sturgeon said in a tweet on Monday that her government would, quote, defend the legislation and stand up for Scottish Parliament, end quote. There is no precedent, as the UK government has never before used its power to block Scottish legislation in this way. Quote, "This is the first time the power has been exercised, and I acknowledge that this is a significant decision," end quote, Jack told lawmakers Tuesday. Goes on to say, "We should be clear that this is absolutely not about the United Kingdom government being able to veto Scottish Parliament legislation whenever it chooses, as some have implied," end quote. What's the political background here? For the past few years, the British government has leaned into anti-trans culture wars debate in a bid to appeal to its traditional Conservative Party base and working-class voters in northern England who switched allegiances from the opposition Labour Party to in the last election. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government had stalled on a number of initiatives for the country's LGBT community, including plans to make it easier for trans people to change their gender markers in England and Wales. Questions remain whether it is electorally viable strategy. Yet prior to become Prime Minister, one of the first pledges by Sunak during the Conservative Party's leadership race in 2022 was protecting women's rights, he wrote in a Twitter post. The post linked to an article in which an unnamed Sunak ally told the Daily Mail that Sunak would create a manifesto opposing trans women competing in women's sports and calling on schools, quote, "to be more careful in how they teach on issues of sex and gender," end quote. At the same time, tensions between London and Edinburgh over the issue of Scottish independence has been rising in recent years. The SNP has already said it views the decision as another example of UK government meddling in Scottish affairs. Speaking in the UK Parliament on Tuesday, Anum Quasar, an SNP lawmaker, said the decision to block the legislation was shameful. Goes on to say, "This decision sets a dangerous precedent where Westminster dictates the Holyrood must simply shut up and do as they are told," she said. When Scotland held a referendum in 2014, voters rejected the prospect of independence by 55% to 45%, but the political landscape was changed since then, mostly because of Brexit. A majority of people in Scotland voted to remain in the European Union in 2016 Brexit referendum, and the pro-independence Scottish National Party has argued that Scots were dragged out of the EU against their will. The SNP has pushed for a new independence vote, but the UK government has said that it will not agree to one. Britain's Supreme Court ruled in November that the Scottish government cannot inalterably hold a second independent referendum. Alright, so they're going crazy. It's only a matter of time till fascism hits them, it sounds like. Okay. Alright, maybe this should be the last one I read for now, because this video is getting already pretty long. Alright. What would changing the Equality Act mean for trans people and single-sex spaces? Kemi Beninoch is considered amending the act to define people's sex as biological sex in England, Scotland, and Wales. Oh, I think this is a continuation of the Scottish thing, but I gotta figure out what this hold on. I gotta figure out what the Equality Act specifically is. Alright. A controversial attempt to overhaul one of the hallmark pieces of equalities laws is being considered by ministers. As they prepare to press ahead with the lengthy and convoluted process, we examined what the reforms would mean for trans people and those advocated for same-sex rights, as well as motivations behind the move. What do ministers want to do? A significant change to the 2010 Equality Act is being pursued by the government. which would redefine sex to refer specifically to the person's sex at birth. That would be designed to make it legal for those who are transgender to be banned from single sex spaces in events such as book groups and hospital wards. Yeah, people who go to book clubs are really against trans. Yeah, seriously, I really doubt this is like a large demographic of library goers are just anti-trans. That does not sound like that. All right. Currently, trans people can have their identity formally recognized by applying for transgender recognition certificate. This affirms their gender change in law, allowing them to update their birth or adoption certificate and have their gender recognized on a marriage or death certificate. This process is not expected to change, but the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, wants to make a clearer distinction in law between those who are born a particular sex and those who transition or identify as a gender from their birth one. This is a complicated thing to do, so Badenoch wrote to the Equality and Human Rights Commission seeking its advice. She said there was, quote, increasing uh, contestation about how the term sex is understood in law and in practice, and that there were, quote, legitimate questions about the current definition under the Equality Act. Badenoch acknowledged that such a change would involve, quote, advantages and disadvantages, end quote, for affected groups. So wanted the UK's human rights watchdogs to give its verdict on the implications of such a move. In 10, Number 10 has suggested it will push ahead through the EHRC's advice that there should be further consideration suggests that the change may take considerable time to enact. What would be the impact? Those who advocate for same-sex rights say it would affirm hard-fought protections for those who are born biologically female, but the impact on trans people would probably be detrimental. Well, it doesn't even stop at little things like preventing them from participating in sports. We know this is just a silly, normie wedge issue because for mostly normies are only gonna like debate small things, only for the fucking people in power to use that to expand on everything else. All right. The EHRC said itself that their legal protection from discrimination, quote, may be unclear given the difficulties of policing any kind of change in the law. In a letter to the government published this week, the body said that if trans women were banned from spaces or services for those born biologically female, quote, in practice, trans people are unlikely to be required to provide proof of their legal status. Why is this happening? Oh, wait. Critics of changing the Equality Act also say trans people would feel they were being targeted with the potential for real-world hostility towards them rising. Okay, why is this happening? Badenoch has said that part of the reason for her intervening on the recent decision by the UK government to block a bill passed by Scottish Parliament that was designed to make it easier for trans people to obtain official gender recognition certificates. She said that were concerns the legislation would adversely affect the operation of the Equality Act, which applies in England, Scottish, and Wales. A recent petition, which was signed by 106,000 people and called for the act to make clear sex related to biological sex and not someone's gender, was also referred to by Badenoch. It is true as well that norms to do with gender identity have changed much since 2010. The EHRC said over the past 13 years, quote, society has evolved considerably in matters related to the two protected characteristics of sex and gender reassignment, end quote, and that the original act uses two terms interchangeably. Yes, these people who want to ban these people for doing anything in our society, yeah, they use it interchangeably, obviously. All right, changing the Equality Act would also mark the delivery of a promise made by Sunak last summer. When Sunak first ran for the Tory leadership, his campaign said he would ensure, quote, women's sports and devices are protected and clarify that self-ID does not have legal force by amending the act to make clear, quote, that sex means biological sex. How would it come into force? Updating the current law, which was passed by Gordon Brown's government, would probably require fresh primary legislation. This could either come in the form of a separate new bill or be contained within another bill, if any relevant ones are planned before the next general election. Legal legal wrangling and inevitable court battles mean that even if the change was made by 2025, it could be months or even years before the issue is resolved. Instead, the Conservative Party may keep the possibility of amending the Equality Act dangling, turning it into an election campaign pledge. This would this would both serve as an incitement to its more socially conservative voters who would become somewhat disillusioned with the party and keep focused on issue that has become uncomfortable territory for the Labour Party. Could there be other motivations at play? Some Tories believe the push for sex-based rights is not just the right thing to do, but ripe for electoral exploitation. Badenoch is one of those unafraid to push persistently on social issues such as gender and race. Some MPs believe she has one eye on building support among rights of the party, both in Parliament and among the membership, in anticipation of another run for the leadership when there is next a vacancy. Alright. Man, I almost want to read another one, guys. But this this may have to be the last one. So, countries in Africa, there's some of them that are just, they love what we're doing. And I will get to that soon, actually. Alright. Uganda, UN experts condemn egregious anti-LGBT legislation. Geneva, 29 March 2023, making homosexuality punishable by death is an egregious violation of human rights. UN experts said today, urging Uganda's president not to promulgate laws that take aim at and further criminalize people identifying as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, and those who support and defend their human rights. Quote, the imposition of the death penalty based on such legislation is per se an arbitrary killing and a breach of Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, experts said, noting that this advance has been provided on several occasions in the Ugandan state in the past. The Ugandan parliament recently approved harsh anti-LGBT laws that targeted and jeopardized the rights of LGBT persons and those who support and defend their human rights. The Ugandan legislation has been criticized as one of the world's harshest LGBT laws. Quote, the imposition of the death penalty, the imposition for the death penalty for same-sex intimacy, including so-called serial homosexuality, is an egregious violation of human rights, end quote, the UN experts said. They warned that the new legislation would exacerbate and legitimize continued stigmatization, violence, harassment, and discrimination against LGBT persons and impact all spheres of their lives. Quote, LGBTQI persons will constantly live in fear and stress for their life and physical integrity for simply living according to their sexual orientation, end quote. The experts said, highlighting also the mental health associated risks. The expert said consistent acts of aggression, intimidation, and harassment, and the proposed legislation threatening the physical and mental integrity and health of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and other gender diverse persons in Uganda. Um, Quote, culture can never be a justification for such flagrant violations of human rights, end quote. The experts said they recalled the obligation of all stakeholders, including states, civil society, and businesses, to promote social inclusion and contribute to stopping human rights abuses. Oh, don't worry. Businesses love just promoting anything. Okay. According to the experts, the Ugandan legislation comes after years of state instigated and perpetuated discrimination and violence on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. The experts repeatedly raised serious concerns about escalating risks to human rights of LGBTQ persons in Uganda over the past 15 years, including when other iterations of so-called anti-homosexuality laws were proposed in 2009, 2012, 2013, and 2014. In all cases, the draft bills were assessed at potentially leading to immediate violations to a substantial range of human rights, including the right to live, liberty, security, privacy, equality, and non-discrimination, freedom of association, peaceful assembly, opinion, expression, and the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, not to be subject to arbitrary arrest or detention, and the absolute prohibition against torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Quote, the new law. Oh, I'll be back, guys.